A homeless teen is denied a job for looking unprofessional at a bustling Seattle coffee shop despite his clean appearance and determined spirit. The manager's cruel dismissal leaves him fighting back tears as he exits, clutching his only resume. Suddenly, Hollywood star Keanu Reeves walks in wearing nearly identical casual clothes: jeans, a simple t-shirt, and worn sneakers. The manager's eyes widen with recognition and excitement, completely unaware of the double standard. What happens next will change the young man's life forever in a story that reveals how a single moment of kindness can transform someone's entire future. Alex Morgan had been homeless for 8 months now. Not that anyone in the coffee shop could tell just by looking at him. The 19-year-old had maintained a careful routine despite living out of a small tent hidden behind an abandoned warehouse near Pike Place Market. Every morning, he would wake before dawn and make his way to the public gym that offered $10 monthly memberships. There, he would shower, brush his teeth, and change into the cleanest clothes from his backpack, a daily ritual to maintain some semblance of dignity. Before everything fell apart, Alex had been a promising student. His mother's prolonged illness had drained their modest savings, and after her death, the medical bills and overdue rent notices piled up until eviction became inevitable. With no other family to turn to and halfway through his senior year of high school, Alex found himself alone on Seattle's increasingly hostile streets. Still, he had managed to graduate, sleeping in shelters when available, studying in public libraries, and never letting his teachers know about his situation. Pride was sometimes all he had left. Today, Alex wore his best outfit, a plain navy t-shirt without holes, his least faded pair of jeans, and the cleanest sneakers he owned. He had ironed the shirt at a community center yesterday and stored it carefully to avoid wrinkles. The jeans were worn at the knees but not ripped. His dark hair was neatly combed, still damp from his morning shower. In his pocket was his only copy of his resume, printed for free at the library and listing his achievements from high school and the few odd jobs he'd managed to find since. The Green Bean was one of Seattle's trendier coffee shops, located in a busy downtown area where tech workers and creatives gathered to work on laptops while sipping overpriced lattes. The shop had posted a "Baristas Wanted" sign 3 days ago, and Alex had prepared meticulously for this opportunity. Morgan Williams, the manager of the Green Bean, took pride in the shop's aesthetic. At 35, she had climbed from barista to manager through determination and an unfailing eye for what customers wanted. She believed firmly that appearances mattered in the service industry. Her employees were expected to embody the shop's carefully cultivated image of casual sophistication, not too formal, but certainly not shabby. When Alex entered the coffee shop that Wednesday morning, a gentle spring rain had just begun to fall outside, the drops catching the morning light like small diamonds. The space buzzed with the familiar sounds of espresso machines and soft background music. The air smelled of fresh ground coffee beans and pastries. Morgan was working behind the counter, her styled blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the signature green apron over a crisp black button-up shirt. When she glanced up and saw Alex approaching, something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Alex had practiced his introduction repeatedly. "Good morning," he said, voice steady despite his nervousness. "I saw your hiring sign. I'd like to apply for the barista position. I have my resume here." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the carefully folded paper, smoothing it on the counter before sliding it toward her. On it were listed his academic achievements, honor roll every semester despite his circumstances, and his experience helping at a local food kitchen in exchange for meals. What Alex couldn't put on that resume was his determination. How he studied barista techniques on free library computers. How he'd practiced pouring techniques using water in borrowed cups at the shelter. How desperately he needed this job, not just for money, but to begin reclaiming his place in society, to have somewhere to belong during the day, to build a foundation that might eventually lead him out of homelessness. Morgan glanced at the resume, her manicured fingernails tapping lightly against the counter as rain continued to fall outside, creating a soft rhythmic backdrop to a moment that would soon change everything. Morgan Williams studied Alex's resume with an unreadable expression. Her eyes scanned the single page quickly, lingering briefly on his educational background before returning to assess his appearance once more. The morning rush had subsided, leaving a momentary lull that allowed for this impromptu interview. "You don't have any actual cafe experience," she stated rather than asked, her voice carrying a slight edge that made Alex's heart sink. The resume trembled almost imperceptibly in his hands, not from fear but from hunger. He hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch at the community center. "No, but I'm a fast learner," Alex replied, maintaining eye contact despite the knot forming in his stomach. "I've been studying coffee preparation techniques online. I understand the importance of consistency and presentation in creating quality espresso drinks." Morgan's eyebrow arched slightly. She glanced down at his worn sneakers, then back to his face. "Making coffee at the Green Bean isn't just about technical skills. Our customers expect a certain atmosphere. We cultivate an image here." The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the large front windows. The sound filled the uncomfortable silence as Alex realized what was happening. This wasn't about his qualifications or lack thereof. This was about how he looked. "I understand that customer experience is essential," Alex continued, his voice steady despite the growing tightness in his chest. "I'm detail-oriented and take pride in my work. I would represent your brand with professionalism." Morgan set the resume down, sliding it back across the counter with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Look, I appreciate you coming in, but we need someone who already fits with our aesthetic. Our clientele expects a certain level of polish." The words stung more than Alex expected. He had spent an hour ensuring his clothes were as presentable as possible. He'd used the last of his travel-size shampoo that morning. He'd even borrowed a friend's nail clippers at the shelter to ensure his appearance was immaculate. Yet somehow, the invisible mark of his circumstances remained visible to people like Morgan. "I understand," Alex said quietly, carefully retrieving his resume and folding it along its original creases. "Thank you for your time." He turned to leave, dignity intact but spirit bruised. Behind him, Morgan had already shifted her attention to adjusting a display of ceramic mugs, his presence already forgotten. The rejection wasn't surprising. It was the fifth one this week, but it cut deeply nonetheless. Each no pushed his dreams of stability further away. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle. Alex stepped under the green awning, taking a deep breath to compose himself. He carefully tucked the resume back into his pocket, protecting it from the rain. That single piece of paper represented everything he was trying to be, everything he had managed to salvage from his former life. He didn't cry. Crying was a luxury he couldn't afford in public. Instead, he stood straighter, shoulders back, chin up, a posture of defiance against circumstances that constantly conspired to keep him down. Alex checked his watch, a simple digital model that had belonged to his mother. He had another potential job lead across town at a warehouse. The bus would take 40 minutes, but if he started walking now, he could save the fare for tomorrow. With one last glance through the Green Bean's window, Alex saw Morgan laughing with a customer, her entire demeanor transformed into warm hospitality. The contrast between her interaction with him and this customer twisted something inside him. It wasn't just that he'd been rejected. It was that he'd been dismissed as though he were invisible, as though his humanity were somehow less valid than others. Alex pulled his thin jacket tighter against the chill and stepped out from under the awning. The rain immediately dampened his carefully maintained hair, water droplets running down his neck. He thought about his tent, whether the patch he'd applied last week would hold against today's downpour. He thought about the library where he would go later to continue his online courses. He thought about tomorrow, and the next interview, and the one after that. So focused was he on these thoughts and the sidewalk ahead that Alex didn't notice the black car pulling up to the curb, nor did he see the man emerging from it, heading toward the very coffee shop he'd just left. The rain fell steadily over Seattle, creating a silver curtain that transformed the ordinary street into something almost magical. Inside the Green Bean, Morgan was arranging a display of locally made chocolates when the bell above the door chimed softly. A tall man stepped inside, raindrops glistening on his dark hair and black jacket. He wore faded jeans with subtle wear at the knees, a simple gray t-shirt that had seen better days, and well-worn athletic shoes. His beard was slightly untrimmed, giving him a casual, approachable appearance. Despite his ordinary attire, there was something magnetic about his presence. Morgan looked up, a polite greeting forming on her lips before recognition dawned in her eyes. Her mouth fell slightly open, and the chocolate she had been arranging tumbled from her fingers back into the display case. Keanu Reeves stood in her coffee shop, looking around with gentle interest at the exposed brick walls and hanging plants. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he noticed her stunned expression. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm and deeper than it sounded in movies. "Could I get a coffee, please?" Morgan's professional demeanor instantly transformed. The coolness she had shown Alex minutes earlier melted away, replaced by effusive warmth. "Mr. Reeves." "Absolutely. What can I get for you?" "It's on the house, of course." Keanu smiled but shook his head gently. "Just a regular coffee is great. And please, I insist on paying." As Morgan hurried to prepare what she promised would be the best coffee in Seattle, Keanu glanced around the shop. Through the front window, he noticed a young man walking away in the rain without an umbrella, shoulders squared against the downpour. "Your shop seems busy," Keanu commented casually. "Do you have enough staff?" Morgan laughed, the sound bright with nervousness. "Actually, we're hiring right now. I just had someone apply, but—" She hesitated, then continued with a dismissive wave. "He wasn't quite right for us. Not the professional image we want to project." Keanu's gaze returned to the window, to the retreating figure now almost at the corner. Something in Morgan's tone caught his attention. "What was wrong with him?" he asked, his voice still friendly but carrying an undercurrent of genuine curiosity. Morgan placed his coffee on the counter. "Oh, you know how it is. First impressions matter in customer service. He just looked a bit rough around the edges. Worn clothes, old shoes." She glanced at Keanu's attire and suddenly seemed to realize the irony. A flush crept up her neck. Keanu followed her gaze to his own worn jeans and comfortable old sneakers, not so different from what he'd glimpsed of the young man walking away in the rain. He picked up his coffee and paid, leaving a generous tip despite Morgan's protests. "Thanks for the coffee," he said simply, but his mind was already elsewhere. Without another word, he turned and headed back into the rain, moving quickly to catch up with the young man who had just disappeared around the corner. The rain intensified as Keanu hurried down the street, his coffee forgotten in his hand. Ahead, the young man walked with his head down, navigating around puddles with practiced precision. Keanu quickened his pace, closing the distance between them. "Hey!" Keanu called out, his voice nearly drowned by a passing truck. Alex didn't hear him at first, his mind occupied with calculating how many more rejections he could endure before his fragile hope crumbled completely. It took Keanu jogging the last few steps and gently touching his shoulder for Alex to notice him. Alex turned, instinctively tensing, a survival reflex from months on the streets. His eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. The man standing before him, rain dripping from his dark hair, was unmistakably Keanu Reeves. "Sorry to chase you down," Keanu said, slightly out of breath. "I was just at that coffee shop." He gestured back toward the green bean with his free hand. Alex blinked, confusion evident on his face. "Did I forget something?" "No, nothing like that." Keanu paused, seemingly considering his words carefully. "I overheard the manager mention turning you down for a job." Alex's expression closed off immediately, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. Being rejected was one thing. Having a celebrity witness that rejection was humiliating on an entirely different level. "It's fine," Alex said stiffly, already taking a half step back. "I'm used to it." Something in those 4 words, "I'm used to it," struck Keanu deeply. The resignation in the young man's voice spoke of too many doors closed, too many opportunities denied. "I'm Keanu," he said, extending his hand. "I know," Alex replied with the ghost of a smile, briefly accepting the handshake. "I'm Alex." The rain continued to fall around them, soaking both men equally. Keanu noticed that Alex's thin jacket offered little protection, yet the young man showed no sign of discomfort. "Listen, Alex, something didn't sit right with me back there," Keanu continued, his voice sincere. "The manager mentioned turning you down because of how you looked. That you weren't professional enough." Alex's jaw tightened. "She said I didn't fit their aesthetic. Yet here I am," Keanu gestured to his own attire, the worn jeans, casual t-shirt, and comfortable old sneakers. "Dressed pretty much the same way you are, and she couldn't have been nicer to me." The irony wasn't lost on Alex, who gave a small, humorless laugh. "That's different. You're Keanu Reeves. And that makes it okay?" Alex shrugged. "That's just how the world works." Keanu studied the young man before him. Despite the obvious exhaustion in his eyes, there was a determined set to his jaw, a dignity in his posture that spoke of someone fighting to maintain his humanity against difficult odds. "Where were you headed?" Keanu asked. "Another job interview. At a warehouse across town," Mind if I walk with you a bit? Alex hesitated, suspicion flickering across his features. Another survival instinct from the streets. Why? It was a fair question. Keanu took a sip of his cooling coffee before answering. Because I'd like to talk with you. And because what happened back there wasn't right. The sincerity in Keanu's voice seemed to reach Alex, who nodded slowly. It's a long walk. I'm not in a hurry, Keanu replied, falling into step beside him. They walked in silence for several blocks, the rain gradually easing into a light mist. Pedestrians occasionally did double takes as they passed, but something in Keanu's body language discouraged interruptions. So, Keanu finally said as they waited for a traffic light to change, tell me about yourself, Alex. What's your story? Alex's story unfolded as they walked through Seattle's misty streets. He spoke hesitantly at first, then with increasing openness about his mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, their eviction, and his determination to finish high school despite everything. He described his daily routine, the early morning showers at the gym, studying at the library, searching for work, and returning to his hidden tent behind the warehouse. Keanu listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When Alex finished speaking, they had reached a small park several blocks from the Green Bean. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the wooden benches damp but usable. So that's it, Alex concluded with a shrug that attempted to minimize the gravity of his situation. It's temporary. I'll figure something out eventually. Keanu was silent for a moment, processing everything he'd heard. You finished high school while homeless, he finally said, not as a question but as an acknowledgement of remarkable strength. Alex nodded, a flash of pride briefly lighting his tired eyes. Graduated with honors. That takes incredible determination, Keanu said. He checked his watch, then looked back at Alex. What time is your warehouse interview? 2 o'clock. That gives us about 3 hours, Keanu said, standing up decisively. Let's go back to the Green Bean. Alex's expression immediately closed. I don't think that's a good idea. Trust me, Keanu said gently. Sometimes people need to confront their biases directly. And I think Morgan needs that opportunity. Alex hesitated but eventually nodded, falling into step beside the actor as they retraced their path. Several people recognized Keanu during their walk back, but he politely declined photos, explaining that he was in the middle of something important. When they reached the Green Bean, the midday rush was in full swing. Morgan was at the register, efficiently processing orders while 2 baristas worked the espresso machines. She looked up as the bell chimed, her face lighting up when she saw Keanu, then freezing when she noticed Alex beside him. Mr. Reeves, she greeted, her voice strained as her eyes darted between the 2 men. You came back. I did, Keanu confirmed, his tone friendly but firm. And I brought Alex with me. I think we should talk. Morgan's smile faltered. I'm quite busy at the moment, as you can see. We'll wait, Keanu replied simply, guiding Alex to a small table in the corner. 20 minutes later, after the rush subsided, Morgan approached their table, her professional smile firmly in place though her eyes betrayed her discomfort. What can I do for you, Mr. Reeves? Please, call me Keanu, he said, gesturing for her to sit. After a moment's hesitation, she complied. I wanted to understand something. Why exactly wasn't Alex right for your coffee shop? Morgan shifted uncomfortably. As I mentioned, we have certain standards. Based on appearance, Keanu interrupted gently. Yet you didn't seem to apply those same standards to me. He gestured to his casual attire, identical in many ways to Alex's. Color rose to Morgan's cheeks. That's different. Because I'm famous? Or because Alex is homeless? The blunt question hung in the air. Morgan's eyes widened slightly as she looked at Alex with new understanding. I didn't know, she stammered. Would it have mattered if you did? Keanu asked, his voice kind but unyielding. Morgan looked at Alex, really seeing him for the first time. Not his clothes or his worn shoes, but the intelligence in his eyes, the dignity in his posture despite everything. I made a mistake, she admitted quietly. I judged without knowing. We all do sometimes, Keanu acknowledged. The question is what we do after we realize it. Morgan's admission hung in the air as the 3 sat in silence for a moment. The afternoon light filtered through the Green Bean's large windows, casting a warm glow across their table. Outside, Seattle continued its bustling pace, unaware of the small but significant transformation occurring inside the coffee shop.
"I'd like to offer Alex the position," Morgan finally said, her voice steady with newfound conviction.
"If he's still interested."
Alex looked up in surprise, his eyes moving from Morgan to Keanu and back again.
"Really?" Morgan nodded. "We open at 6 a.m. Training starts tomorrow, if that works for you." "It does," Alex replied, a cautious hope entering his voice. "Thank you." After Morgan returned to the counter, Alex turned to Keanu. "I appreciate what you did, but you don't have to stay. I don't want to take up more of your time." Keanu checked his watch. "You still have your warehouse interview, right? How about I give you a ride there?" During the drive to the warehouse in Keanu's understated black car, their conversation shifted. Rather than focusing on Alex's struggles, Keanu began asking about his interests, his skills, his dreams before homelessness had interrupted them. "I was planning to study architecture," Alex revealed as they navigated through downtown traffic. "I've always been fascinated by how buildings shape people's experiences, how spaces can make people feel connected or isolated." Keanu's interest seemed genuine. "Have you kept designing?" Alex hesitated, then reached for his backpack in the footwell. From a side pocket, he carefully extracted a small, worn sketchbook. "When I can find pencils," he said, handing it over at a red light. Keanu flipped through the pages, his expression growing increasingly impressed. The book contained dozens of intricate sketches, buildings that seemed to grow organically from their surroundings, innovative housing concepts, public spaces that flowed with natural movement patterns. The drawings were detailed and technically impressive, but what stood out was the humanity in the designs, each created with people's experiences in mind. "These are extraordinary," Keanu said, returning the sketchbook as the light changed. "Is that a community center?" Alex nodded. "With integrated housing for people transitioning out of homelessness." He pointed to features in the design. "See how the public areas connect to private spaces? It provides dignity while maintaining community support." For the next 20 minutes, Alex explained his various concepts with growing animation. Keanu asked thoughtful questions, pointing out elements that particularly impressed him. As they pulled up outside the warehouse for Alex's interview, Keanu made a decision. "Would you mind if I waited?" he asked. "I'd like to continue our conversation after your interview." Alex looked surprised but nodded. "It shouldn't take long." While Alex was interviewing, Keanu made several phone calls from his car, speaking in low, determined tones. By the time Alex emerged from the warehouse 45 minutes later, several plans had been set in motion. "How did it go?" Keanu asked as Alex settled back into the passenger seat. "I got the job," Alex replied, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Stocking shelves. Overnight shift. Between this and the coffee shop, I might be able to save enough for a room somewhere in a few months." Keanu nodded thoughtfully, then gestured to the sketchbook. "May I see that again?" As Alex handed it over, Keanu turned to a particularly detailed drawing of a sustainable apartment complex. "Tell me about this one." Alex's entire demeanor transformed as he explained his concept. His voice became confident, his gestures animated, his knowledge evident. He described environmental considerations, social interaction spaces, cost-effective construction methods, revealing a depth of self-taught expertise that went far beyond basic sketches. "How long have you been designing buildings?" Keanu asked when Alex paused for breath. "Since I was 12, Alex admitted. "My mom used to take me to the library to look at architecture books. I'd copy the designs, then start changing them, improving them." His expression softened at the memory. "She always said I'd build something amazing someday." Keanu carefully closed the sketchbook and handed it back. "I think she was right," he said simply. "Alex, I know this might seem strange, but I'd like to help you with more than just a coffee shop job." Rain began falling again as they sat in Keanu's car, the gentle patter creating a private atmosphere that made their conversation feel somehow separate from the world outside. Alex listened with increasing disbelief as Keanu outlined what he had in mind. "I know people at the University of Washington's architecture program," Keanu explained. "One of my friends teaches there. I showed him photos of your sketches while you were interviewing." Alex's eyes widened. "You did what?" He was impressed, Keanu continued. Very impressed. He wants to meet with you next week to discuss your potential as a student. Alex shook his head slowly. I can't afford college. Even with scholarships, there's housing, books, supplies. That's where I come in, Keanu said simply. I'd like to help with that. The rain intensified, drumming against the car roof as Alex processed what he was hearing. His throat tightened with emotion he couldn't quite express. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. Keanu was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. Sometimes people just need someone to see their potential, he finally said. Someone who removes the barriers so they can become who they're meant to be. He started the car and pulled away from the warehouse. There's a place I want to show you. 20 minutes later, they parked outside a modest apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. The rain had softened to a light drizzle as they walked up to a second-floor unit. Keanu produced a key and opened the door. This is a furnished studio apartment, he explained as they stepped inside. Nothing fancy, but it's clean, safe, and close to both the university and the Green Bean. Alex stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the small but immaculate space, a bed with fresh linens, a desk by the window, a kitchenette with basic appliances, and a private bathroom. Sunlight broke through the clouds outside, sending a shaft of golden light through the window and across the wooden floor. I don't understand, Alex whispered. It's yours, Keanu said simply. For as long as you need it. The rent is paid for a year. Alex turned to him, eyes glistening. I can't accept this. You can, Keanu countered gently. And someday, when you're a successful architect, you can design buildings that help other people who need a second chance. Alex walked slowly into the apartment, touching the desk as if to confirm it was real. On its surface sat a new laptop, several architecture textbooks, and a professional drafting kit. Your interview at the university is Monday morning, Keanu continued. You'll still have your job at the Green Bean if you want it, but you won't need the warehouse position. Your focus should be on your education now. Alex stood by the window, looking out at the city, the same city that had been so harsh and unforgiving just hours earlier. His shoulders began to shake slightly as the enormity of the transformation overwhelmed him. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice breaking. You don't have to, Keanu replied. Just make something beautiful someday. 6 months passed in a blur of transformation. The studio apartment had become a true home for Alex, its walls now adorned with architectural drawings, bookshelves filled with textbooks, and a small cactus thriving on the windowsill. The space represented not just shelter but stability, a foundation from which Alex could rebuild his life. The coffee shop job had provided routine and community. Morgan had proven to be a better person than their first encounter suggested, becoming something of a mentor to Alex. She had adjusted his schedule to accommodate his university classes and often set aside pastries that would otherwise be discarded at closing time. Alex's enrollment at the University of Washington's architecture program had been seamless thanks to Keanu's connections. His raw talent had impressed the faculty from the beginning, but it was his unique perspective on urban housing and community spaces, informed by his own experiences, that truly set him apart. His professors frequently commented on the humanity evident in his designs, the attention to how architectural spaces could foster dignity and connection. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Keanu returned to Seattle and met Alex at a small park near campus. The young man who greeted him barely resembled the defeated figure from that rainy day 6 months earlier. Alex stood taller now, his face fuller and healthier, his eyes clear and focused. He carried a portfolio case containing his latest university projects. They sat on a bench overlooking the water, surrounded by trees turning golden in the fall light. Alex opened his portfolio, proudly showing Keanu the designs that had earned him top marks in his classes. This is my midterm project, Alex explained, pointing to a comprehensive design for an urban community center. The professor said it was graduate-level work. Keanu studied the drawings with genuine interest. Your mom was right, he said simply. You're building something amazing. Alex smiled, the mention of his mother no longer bringing only pain. I received a scholarship for next semester, he added. Full tuition. I'm not surprised, Keanu replied. You've earned it. They talked for nearly an hour about Alex's classes, his growing circle of friends, and his plans for the future. As their conversation drew to a close,
Alex reached into his bag and pulled out an envelope.
"This is for you," he said, handing it to Keanu. "It's not much, but it's a start."
Inside was a check, the beginning of a repayment for the apartment and supplies. Keanu considered it briefly, then handed it back.
"I have a better idea," he said. "When you finish school and start your career, find someone else who needs a chance. Help them instead."
Alex nodded slowly, understanding the deeper meaning behind the gesture.
"I will."
As they parted ways, Alex stopped and turned back.
"That day at the coffee shop, you could have just walked past. Most people would have."
Keanu smiled.
"Most people want to help, they just don't always know how."
The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park as they went their separate ways. Alex toward his evening class, Keanu toward the airport.
Neither man was the same as they had been that rainy morning 6 months earlier. One life had been transformed through unexpected kindness, and another enriched by the simple act of seeing potential where others saw only circumstance. 2 years later, Seattle's skyline glowed in the golden light of late afternoon as Keanu stepped out of a taxi in front of an innovative new building near Pike Place Market. Its sleek glass exterior blended harmoniously with the historic brick structures surrounding it, at once modern and respectful of the neighborhood's character. Above the entrance, a discreet sign read, "Second Chance Housing Initiative." Keanu paused to admire the building's thoughtful design. The ground floor featured an inviting coffee shop, not the Green Bean, but a new establishment called Morgan's Place. Through large windows, he could see comfortable seating arranged to encourage conversation, with a community bulletin board covered in job postings and educational opportunities. Inside, the lobby bustled with activity. A volunteer at the welcome desk greeted visitors warmly. Behind her, a wall displayed photographs documenting the building's construction and the faces of its first residents. And there, in the center of it all, stood Alex, now a confident young man of 22, dressed in a simple but professional button-down shirt, explaining the building's features to a small group of interested community members. Alex spotted Keanu and excused himself, crossing the lobby with an outstretched hand and a genuine smile. "You made it," he said. "I wasn't sure if you'd be able to come."
"I wouldn't have missed it," Keanu replied, taking in the space around them.
"This is extraordinary, Alex." The building represented Alex's first realized design, a transitional housing complex specifically created for young adults experiencing homelessness. Each compact but dignified apartment provided not just shelter but a foundation for rebuilding lives. The complex included counseling spaces, educational resources, job training facilities, and community areas designed to foster connection and mutual support.
"Let me show you around," Alex offered, leading Keanu toward an elevator.
"We've already filled half the units, and we have a waiting list for the rest." As they toured the building, Alex explained how he'd partnered with several local businesses and non-profit organizations, including Morgan from the Green Bean, who had evolved from reluctant employer to passionate advocate. She'd helped secure funding for the coffee shop training program that now occupied the building's ground floor. The residents can learn barista skills, customer service, basic accounting, everything they need to work in the industry, Alex explained. Morgan comes in 3 times a week to teach classes. On the roof, a garden space provided both food and therapy for residents. Solar panels gleamed in the setting sun, powering much of the building's electrical needs. Every element of the design served multiple purposes, maximizing both functionality and human dignity. The university featured the project in their annual showcase, Alex said as they stood looking out over the city. "I've been offered a position at an architectural firm specializing in community-based design after I graduate next year." Keanu nodded, taking it all in. "How many people will live here?" 48 residents at full capacity, Alex replied. "It's not enough, but it's a start."
"Sometimes that's all it takes," Keanu said quietly.
"A start." As evening approached, they made their way back to the lobby where a small celebration was beginning, the official building opening. Residents mingled with community leaders, volunteers, and supporters. The atmosphere hummed with possibility and hope. "You know," Alex said as they watched the gathering, "everyone thinks this building is just about providing housing. But it's really about seeing people, really seeing them." Keanu smiled, remembering their first meeting in the rain. "The way you saw me that day at the Green Bean," Alex continued. "Not as a homeless kid, but as someone with potential." "That's the thing about kindness," Keanu replied. It's not just about what it does for someone today. It's about what it empowers them to do tomorrow. Around them, the building stood as a testament to that truth. One moment of recognition transformed into a structure that would transform countless other lives, creating ripples of possibility that would continue long after both men had gone.